All right, if you're a travel nurse stepping into 2026, you already know the market has shifted pretty dramatically, right? The days of those pandemic-era blank checks, yeah, they're gone. Hospitals' budgets are tightening up, rates have stabilized, and facilities are scrutinizing every single dollar they spend on contingent labor. But for those of you in the step-down specialty, you're actually facing a really unique set of challenges and opportunities this year. Our goal today is direct and totally uncompromising. We're going to break down exactly how you can maximize your income while fiercely protecting your nursing license in a market that's, quite frankly, trying to pay you less for doing more.
So picture this. It's 2 in the morning, you're scrolling the job boards, and you see 2 totally identical postings for a step-down travel nurse. But clinically, there's a massive catch. They are worlds apart. Imagine walking into the first scenario. You're managing complex vasoactive drips, titrating cardiac meds minute by minute, dealing with near-ICU acuity patients who could literally code at any second. The physical and mental stress is palpable. Now picture the second scenario. You're essentially dropped onto a busy telemetry floor. You're focused on continuous cardiac monitoring, passing daily meds, handling a bunch of discharges. It's busy, absolutely, but the life or death intensity is just completely different. So ask yourself, are you being paid fairly when the actual clinical workload can be that drastically different? That is the core question we're answering today.
Here's exactly how we're going to break this down. First, the step-down pay range. Then, the ambiguity trap. 3, geography and earnings. 4, the PCCN Certification boost. And finally, the pre-signing checklist.
Let's dive right into number 1, the step-down pay range.
Here is your headline number 4 for 2026. The national average right now sits right around $2,067 to $2,139 a week. Let's actually unpack what that means for your bank account, though. That weekly average isn't just one lump sum of taxable income. It's a blend of your hourly taxable wage plus your non-taxable housing and meal stipends. This figure puts the step-down specialty solidly in the mid-tier of travel nursing compensation. Hospital finance departments budget for this specific tier because it requires a highly specialized skill set, you know? You're commanding rates definitively above a standard Med-Surg floor, roughly comparable to telemetry, but generally sitting just below the highest-paying critical care specialties like ICU, OR, or the ER. But look, as seasoned travelers, we know an average only tells a fraction of the story. You don't want the average, you want the ceiling.
Take a look at the extreme variance in the pay spectrum here. On the low end of the market, you might see packages hovering around a pretty dismal $1,384 a week. Ouch. But look over at the high demand bar on the right. In critical shortage areas or states with structural demands, places like California, Washington, New York, or Hawaii, those packages are pushed substantially higher. They're routinely crossing that $2,554 mark and even reaching up to $2,700 a week. So why is the gap so massive? It really comes down to union strength, state-mandated ratios, severe regional shortages, and just localized cost of living. Facilities in those high-demand markets literally have no choice but to authorize premium bill rates to keep their progressive care units safely staffed.
Which brings us perfectly to number 2, the ambiguity trap. First, let's actually define the true clinical parameters here. Depending on the hospital, this unit could be called step-down, PCU for progressive care unit, IMCU, or intermediate care. Clinically speaking, it's the critical bridge between the ICU and the general medical floors. You're typically managing post-surgical cardiac and thoracic cases or stroke recovery with standard nurse-to-patient ratios of 1:3 to 1:4. Think about the extreme vulnerability of these patients for a second. They might have just been stepped down from the ICU, meaning they are just one minor complication away from a rapid response. They are absolutely not yet stable enough for a general floor. This high liability risk is exactly why this specialty demands a premium, and it's why you have to guard your license so carefully.
And here is where the trap actually springs. Look at the stark contrast in how facilities define these responsibilities. Hospitals will often use step-down and telemetry interchangeably on their job postings, even though the actual acuity on the floor is just night and day. In a true step-down unit, you could be managing vasoactive and antiarrhythmic drips at near ICU intensity. But at another hospital down the street, a step-down unit is really just a busy floor focused heavily on continuous cardiac monitoring, overlapping completely with basic telemetry. The real-world danger here is huge. Imagine walking into a shift expecting stable post-op telemetry patients, only to be handed 3 highly unstable patients requiring active drip titration, all while still holding a 1:4 or even a 1:5 ratio. In that scenario, you are performing near ICU intensity work for standard floor pay. You're putting your license directly in the crosshairs if something goes wrong.
The data explicitly outlines how the line between step-down and telemetry varies enormously by facility. This is exactly why you must interrogate the actual acuity before you accept an offer. Seriously, do not assume anything based on the title. When you get on the phone with unit manager for your clinical interview, you need to use a very specific script. Ask them directly, what is the absolute maximum ratio for this unit? Exactly which drips are managed on this floor, and am I responsible for active titration? And will I be expected to float to the ICU or Med-Surg? If they hesitate at all, or if the answers don't match the pay rate you're being offered, you have a massive red flag. The headline title alone is just not going to tell you the truth.
Let's move on to number 3, geography and earnings.
Let's contrast two major strategic plays here, because where you work completely dictates what you actually get to keep. On the left, we've got the California premium. California leads the pack on pay, and a huge driver of this is their strict state-mandated ratio laws, which makes it highly desirable from a safety standpoint. However, those massive gross numbers get eaten into very quickly by a state income tax that can reach up to 13.3%, combined with insane coastal housing costs. Contrast that with states like Washington and Texas. Let's just do the actual math for a second. If you take a contract making $3,200 gross in Los Angeles, after that 13% state tax and maybe $2,500 in monthly rent, your actual take-home net might be much lower than a $2,400 gross contract in Houston, Texas. Why? Because Texas has zero state income tax, and your rent might literally be half the price. Remember, it is never about what you make gross, it is entirely about what you keep net.
All right, on to number 4, the PCCN Certification Boost.
$2 to $5 an hour. That is the specific increase you can command to your taxable base rate with the right credentials. Now keep in mind, this is added to your taxable base, not your stipend. Let's look at the compounding power of this over a standard assignment. If you negotiate a $5 an hour increase to your base, that translates to $7.50 an hour on your overtime rate. If you're working a 13-week contract at 48 hours a week, that simple base rate bump yields over $3,500 in pure extra cash for the exact same amount of work. That base rate is what counts for your Social Security, Medicare, and how your overtime is calculated. It compounds incredibly fast. And the certification that unlocks this free money? It's the PCCN, the Progressive Care Certified Nurse Credential, through the AACN. This is the definitive certification that actually moves the needle for step-down and PCU nurses. Now, not every single facility offers a bill rate modifier for it, but enough of them do that it is absolutely worth asking your recruiter directly every single time you negotiate. The cost of the exam literally pays for itself in the first 2 weeks of a new contract. If you are considering traveling in this specialty and you don't have it yet, secure your PCCN before your first assignment. Seriously, stop leaving thousands of dollars on the table. It strengthens your negotiating position from day one.
Finally, number 5, the pre-signing checklist. You need to run through this checklist like you're reviewing a high-stakes legal document, because these specific terms protect both your income and your nursing license. First, confirm your guaranteed hours and the shift cancellation policy in writing. Second, demand written confirmation of your actual patient ratios. Third, get absolute clarity on exactly which drips the unit manages and what the titration policies are. And finally, you must restrict your floating clauses strictly to like units only, meaning you only agree to float to telemetry, PCU, or cardiac units. You do not agree to open floating to general Med-Surg. Why? Because as a specialized step-down nurse, floating to Med-Surg introduces totally different workflows. Massive 1-to-6 or 1-to-7 ratios, and frankly, it degrades your highly specialized critical care skills over time. Protect your specialty. Let this formula sink in for a second. If a contract has an open floating clause to lower tier floors, combined with a patient ratio above 1-to-4, you are in very dangerous territory. That combination literally means you are doing far more work than the step-down job title suggests, and you're taking on massive clinical liability for patients that require more monitoring than you can physically provide. If you see this exact formula in your contract paperwork, it is a trigger to immediately renegotiate the terms, or just simply pass on the contract altogether. No amount of weekly gross pay is worth risking the license you worked so hard to earn.
And that leaves us with this final, absolutely crucial question to ask yourself as you navigate the 2026 market. Are you just settling for the job title at the top of the posting? Or are you meticulously negotiating for the actual clinical acuity you'll be managing on the floor? It's time to stop accepting the headline gross numbers at face value.
decode your tax home status, understand the state-by-state net math, demand written ratio protections, and ensure you are being paid exactly what your specialized skills are worth. Do not let ambiguity drain your wallet or threaten your license. Go out there and command what you deserve.